Hey, what's up guys? This video is for section 8.7, which is solving quadratic equations in the form ax squared plus bx plus c equal to 0. And today, for this video, the value of a in front of the x squared will not equal to 1. On my previous video, section 8.6, a was 1, it equals to 1, but not in this video. So we are going to do a little bit more steps for this video here. First, we need to remember how to factor. Remember that when you guys want to solve a quadratic equation, usually you can solve by factoring. And after you guys factor, you can use the zero product property. So you guys can see the steps here on the screen. And one method that I like to do, there's many methods to factor a quadratic trinomial. But one of the methods I use is I make a diagram here. And like an X, on top, I put the product of A and C. So I multiply A times C here. It might be a negative, it might be a positive number. And then on the bottom, I put the B value. So this, if it's positive, it's going to be a positive number. If it's a minus, it's going to be a negative number. You guys are going to find two factors here that you guys need to multiply to get this number on the top. But when you guys combine, it's going to equal the one on the bottom. So you might add or you might subtract to get the bottom number. But you guys need to multiply to get the top number. In step number 2, so this is step number 1. Step 2, you guys will make two binomials multiplying each other just like this here. You guys will have your ax term in the beginning of the parentheses. Notice I'm not using the squared because when you guys multiply ax times the x over here, x times x, that's going to be the x squared. So we don't want a squared inside of the parentheses. You just want an ax and ax. You guys will bring down your factors right here after the ax term. Bring down your factors after the ax term. And the next step is very important for this video and when you guys have a trinomial when a is not equal to 1. Very important. You cannot forget the next step. The next step is when a is not 1, make sure you guys divide the binomials by its greatest common factor if they have one. So if you guys can divide these two numbers by a common factor, greatest common factor, you have to. Or if you guys can divide these two here by the greatest common factor, you have to do that. If you don't do that, your answer will be totally wrong. So very important, you guys do not forget step number 3 to divide the binomials by its GCF if they have one, all right? If a equals 1, like the previous video, then they're not going to have a GCF. You guys will not be able to, I say reduce the binomials, but you just dividing by the GCF. If a equals 1, you do not have to do that. But when a is not 1, make sure you guys, you divide by the GCF if they have 1. So let's look at some examples here. When you guys have to factor, now remember that in order to solve, we need to know how to factor the trinomial because using the zero product property, we must have the factors. So we are going to factor. I'm going to have to do a second video and I'm going to show you guys the solving part after you guys factor. So make sure you guys check that video out. But right now, we are going to factor 4x squared plus 8x plus 3. What two binomials will multiply to this trinomial? So the first thing is, I do my diagram here, and I'm going to multiply the a and the c. So remember, the a is the one with the x squared, b is the one with the x, and c is your constant. So I multiply a times c, 4 times 3, that's going to be 12. And I bring down the b value, and the b value is 8. So it is a plus 8, we have a positive 8. You guys are going to find two numbers that multiply to 12, and they add up to 8. So the numbers 6 and 2. 6 times 2 is 12, and 6 plus 2 is 8. So make sure those two numbers work every time you guys find the factors. Now that you guys have the factors, you are going to set up your answer, your binomials. So I have two binomials here. I'm going to put the ax term. Notice a is for x. Do not use the square. You're going to bring down the ax here, 4x, and 4x on the other binomial. That's how you set up your answer. Then you guys bring down your factors. So factor number 1 plus 6 here. Factor number 2 plus 2 over here. So that's your factors. Factor 1, factor 2. Then step number 3, guys, and this is very important. You need to divide the binomials by its GCF, greatest common factor. So I notice 4 and 6 we can divide. You guys can divide the numbers by 2. And when I'm looking over here, 4x and 2, the 4 and the 2, you can also divide. And the greatest common factor is 2 again, right? They don't have to be the same every time, but you just look for the greatest common factor. So after you divide, I'm going to have a 2. 4 divided by 2 is 2x plus a 3. You guys divide the 6 and the 2 here. And the second parenthesis, you guys will have 4 divided by 2. That's going to be 2 again. X and 2 divided by 2 will be 1. So we have a plus 1 there. And that's the answer. When you guys multiply the two binomials, 2x plus 3 times 2x plus 1, you guys will get a 4x squared plus 8x plus 3. How do you know? Well, you guys can check. If you multiply 2x times 2x, 2x times 2x is 4x squared. If you multiply the 3 and the 1, 3 times 1, that's going to be 3. And if you guys want to check the 1 in the middle, you guys can do this right here. You multiply the 3 and the 2x, that's going to be 6x. You multiply the 2x and the 1, that's going to be 2x. And if you combine 6x plus 2x, that's going to be 8x. So that's the middle term that we have in the trinomial. 8x here, and we got an 8x. So our answer is right here. You guys have two binomials multiplying each other. All right, let's try another one. So I have 2y squared minus 35y plus 17. Well, you do the diagram. So I'm going to have the diagram here. I'm going to multiply a times c. So a is the first term, c is the last term, and this is when you have standard form. Make sure it's in order from highest exponent to the lowest one. Highest exponent is 2, and then we have a 1, x1 and a 1 here, and then the constant. So it is in order. So I multiply 2 times 17, and that's going to be 34, positive 34. My b value is negative 35. So I need to find two numbers that multiply to 34, and they add up to negative 35. Well, guys, remember that tip I gave you guys in the previous video. If this number is positive, that means the two factors must have the same sign. And since this bottom number is negative, then the two signs have to be negative. So negative 1 and negative 34 multiplies to positive 34. And when you combine, you get negative 35. Now, so those two factors work. Now you guys have your two binomials right here. I'm going to take my ax, in this case is y. That's okay. You guys can use any variable. So I'm going to take this term, 2y and 2y here. I'm going to bring down the factors. There's the minus 1. Here's the minus 34. And I have to reduce the binomials. I have to divide by the GCF. So I'm looking at the 2y minus 1. The 2 and the 1, they don't have a common factor other than 1. You guys can divide by 1, but that's not going to change anything. So you don't have to divide by 1. They don't have a different common factor, so that one stays the same. But over here, the 2 and the 34, you guys can divide those numbers by 2. So I'm going to divide by 2 here. So I'm going to have a 2y minus 1 and a 1y. This turns into 1, 2 divided by 2. I don't need that one. Minus 17. So you guys get 2y minus 1 times y minus 17. If you guys distribute, if you guys multiply, you will get this trinomial back. And you guys can check again. You guys can multiply 2y times y. That's going to be 2y squared. Negative 1 times negative 17. That's positive 17. You can multiply this right here. Negative 1 times y. That's negative y. You guys can multiply negative 2y times negative 17. That's negative 34y. Negative 1y minus 34y. That's going to give you your negative 35y. So you guys can check. You don't have to every time, but just make sure that you guys follow the steps and don't forget any of those steps. All right, so let's just try a few more here. 3y squared plus 13y minus 10. I'm going to do my diagram right there. You guys will multiply the a and the c. So 3 times negative 10 is negative 30. My b value is positive 13. Now guys, when this number here is negative, the signs for the factors must be different. So one positive, one negative, and they have to combine to positive 13. So I am looking for those numbers, and I notice that 15 times negative 2, that's negative 30, and 15 minus 2 is positive 13. When you guys combine 15 minus 2, positive 13. So let's go ahead and do our binomials. So I'm going to have a 3y at the beginning, 3y here, a 3y over here. Remember, that's your ax term, or in this case is y, but we have a 3y. I'm going to bring down the factors, plus 15 here, and the minus 2 over here. Make sure you guys check. Since a is not 1, you guys have to check for the GCF, greatest common factor. So the first binomial, I can divide by 3. And the second binomial, 3 and 2, they don't have a common factor, so that one stays the same. So I'm going to have a 1y plus a 5 and a 3y minus a 2. And those are my two binomials. You guys multiply and you guys get the trinomial back. Now this one, guys, I want to show you because you guys have the negative at the beginning of the polynomial. So remember that every time you guys have a negative at the beginning, you guys have to factor that out, first of all. So every time you guys have that in a polynomial, it doesn't matter if it's a binomial or a trinomial or even a quadrinomial, you guys have to factor out the negative. So I'm going to factor out the negative here. And when you guys factor out the negative, all you have to do, guys, you have to change the sign of the trinomial. If you have a negative and there's an invisible 1 here, you guys just change the signs. So that negative 7x squared becomes a positive 7x squared. The positive 26 becomes a minus 26x, and the positive 8 becomes a negative 8. Now you guys factor what's inside of the parentheses, this trinomial here. So I'm going to multiply the a inside the parentheses times the c. So this 7 times the negative 8. So when I do the diagram here, I'm going to get a negative 56. My b value is negative 26. So I look for the two factors, I multiply to negative 56. It might take you guys a while. That's okay, guys. Just make sure you guys check and the two numbers have to work. So negative 28 times 2, that's going to be negative 56. And negative 28 plus 2 is negative 26. All right. So now you guys do your two binomials. So I'm going to do my first binomial, 7x. Notice I'm using the 7x inside of the parentheses. I don't go back to the beginning because remember we factor out the negative. So you don't use the negative anymore. We have a 7x here and a 7x over here. You bring down the factors, minus 28 and the positive 2. Reduce the binomials. The first one you can divide by 7 here. The second one, the 7x and the 2, you guys cannot divide. So we are going to have a 1x minus 4 times a 7x plus a 2. Right there, guys. Now, remember that negative we factor out up here? Well, that's part of your answer. If you guys factor out the negative, you must bring down the negative and it goes outside of the parentheses. So my answer will be a negative x minus 4, negative times x minus 4 times 7x plus 2. So if you distribute, if you multiply, you will get that trinomial back. And if you want to do that, guys, make sure you multiply the two binomials first. Don't worry about the negative. When you multiply the two binomials, x times 7x, x times 2, negative 4 times 7x, negative 4 times 2, you guys will get this trinomial back. Then you guys will distribute the negative and you guys will get the actual trinomial at the beginning after you guys distribute the negative. Now the next one, this one here, we don't have a negative, so we don't have to worry about taking out a number. So I'm just going to do my diagram here. I am going to multiply the a and the c. So 2 times negative 6, that's going to be negative 12. My b value is 3, and I want to find those factors. So let's go ahead and find those factors here. I'm thinking about the numbers. I'm checking. I'm going to use, and Notice the number is negative here, so one has to be the factors. One has to be negative, one has to be positive. So let me try negative 1 and 12, and I'm checking if they add up to or combine to 3. They do not, so I'm going to cross this one out. I'm going to try negative 2 times 6. So when you guys have a negative 2 plus 6, that's going to be positive 4. Nope, doesn't work. They do multiply to negative 12, but it doesn't give you guys a 3. So this one don't work. I'm going to try the negative 3 times the 4. Well, negative 3 plus 4, that's 1, not 3. So I'm going to cross this one out here. 4, we already used the 4 here. 5 doesn't go into 12. 6, we already used the 6 here. We notice it doesn't work. 7, 8, 9. You know what, guys? None of the numbers work. So we cannot find any factors that will multiply to negative 12 and add up to 3. And that can happen, guys. That can happen. A trinomial cannot be factorable sometimes. So when that happens, if you cannot find factors, we have a specific name for that trinomial. We say the trinomial is prime. So what that means, guys, think about the numbers prime. You know about the prime numbers. 1 is prime, 5 is prime, 11 is prime, 13 is prime, 17 is prime, because the only numbers that multiply to those numbers is 1 in itself. 1 times 5 is 5, 1 times 11 is 11. 6 is not prime, because 6 you can multiply 2 times 3, so they do have factors. 9 is not prime, because you can multiply 1 times 9 and 3 times 3. So 3 is a factor, so 9 is not prime. But when a trinomial cannot be factored, it is a prime. So I'm just going to write this down here. The trinomial cannot be factored. Okay, so you guys will have your trinomial, and it is prime when you guys cannot find those numbers. Alright, guys, so the last thing I'm going to show you with factoring here is when you guys have to factor completely. And let me tell you guys the word completely. Usually when you guys have that word, it means that you guys can factor out a GCF, greatest common factor, first. And then you guys factor whatever you can. So you guys have to factor completely all the way until you guys cannot do anything else. So when you look at the first one here, we have the 30x squared plus 55x plus 15. Well, I'm looking at the actual values, the coefficients, 30, 55, and 15. They do have a common factor. The common factor is 5. So you guys can factor out. Notice I'm going to use a big parenthesis, and we can factor out the 5. When you guys factor out the 5, you're going to start dividing the coefficients by 5. So 30 divided by 5, that's going to be 6x squared. 55 divided by 5, that's going to be 11x. And the 15 divided by 5 is going to be 3. Now, if you're thinking about the x's, here's an x squared, here's an x. This one doesn't have an x. So what that means, you cannot factor out an x. The only thing you guys can factor out is a 5, the GCF. Now, look at the trinomial. The trinomial inside, we have smaller numbers. We have a 6, 11, and 3, and we have a squared, and it is a trinomial. So we can factor the quadratic trinomial. Or maybe we're going to have to check. Maybe it's prime, but you guys just make sure you factor if you can. And why do we factor out the 5? If you want to factor without taking out the 5, you guys know the steps. If you multiply a times c to factor, well, that's going to be a huge number. So I don't want to do that. 30 times 15, that's going to be huge. But if you guys factor out the 5, well, the only thing you have to multiply now is this number 6 times the 3. And that's going to be 18. That's a very small number comparing to the 30 and the 15. So you guys will factor what's inside of the parentheses. The 6 and the 3 you multiply, that's going to be 18. 11 is the big term. You guys find those two factors that multiply, and that's going to be 9 times 2. You guys write down your two binomials here. So I'm going to have the 6x, and over here I'm going to bring down the plus 9, the plus 2, and you guys make sure you divide the binomials. So I notice I can divide by 3 here, and you guys can divide by 2 over here. And you guys have to divide both numbers. Okay, that's how you reduce the binomial, you divide. So I'm going to have a 2x plus 3 here, and a 3x plus 1 over here. And you must bring down the 5 we factor out, just like the negative I showed you guys before. You bring down the 5 outside of the parentheses, and your answer is 5 times the quantity of 2x plus 3 times the quantity of 3x plus 1. So if you guys have a GCF and you can find one, you can factor that out, and it's going to make your life a lot easier. Now this one is a little bit more that you guys can factor out, because first of all, I notice we can factor out the negative. That's at the beginning of the polynomial. 24, the 32, and the minus 8, you guys can factor out an 8. The greatest common factor is 8. If you say 4, yeah, you guys can factor out a 4, but it's not the greatest number. It's not the greatest common factor you can factor out. 8 is the biggest one. And if you guys notice on the m's, m cubed, m squared, and this one has an m with the first power, so you guys can also factor out an m. Every term has an m. So I'm going to factor out the negative, I'm going to factor out the 8, and the m. And I'm using an exponent of 1 because the lowest exponent for the m's is the 1 right here. There's a 1, so I'm just going to keep the 1. We don't need to write it, it's just an invisible 1. So I'm going to start dividing. Make sure you guys check your signs, because we have a negative 24 divided by negative 8. That's going to be positive 3. You guys have an m squared, but you guys took out 1. You guys took out an m. So we're going to have an m squared here. Positive 32 divided by negative 8. That's going to be negative 4. You guys have an m squared, but you guys took out an m. So we're just going to have an m here. And negative 8 divided by negative 8, that's positive 1. And you guys took out the m, so no m here. Now you guys are going to factor the trinomial inside of the parentheses. So this 3m squared minus 4m plus 1. You guys will multiply the 4 and the c. I mean the a, not the 4, sorry. The a times the c. So 3 times 1 is 3. My b value is negative 4. And I notice that we can multiply negative 3 and negative 1 to get positive 3, and negative 3 minus 1 is negative 4. So my two binomials will be a 3m. Notice the m, 3m inside of the parentheses. Don't go back to here, guys. We want to factor this here too. So we use 3m minus 3 and 3m minus 1 over here. And you guys check if you can divide. So we can 3 divided by 3 here. The second binomial you guys cannot divide. So we have a 1m minus 1 times a 3m minus 1 here. And you bring down the negative 8 all the way here. So we have minus 8 with the m. I forgot the m, but you guys bring down the negative 8m. So your answer is all of this right here, guys. Make sure you guys have the negative outside, the 8m outside, and the m minus 1 times 3m minus 1. If you guys have those binomials backwards, if you have the 3m minus 1 here and the m minus 1 over here, that's okay, guys. Commutative property of multiplication says order doesn't matter. But some textbooks, they put the binomials from smallest to highest. But I'm not too picky on that, so you're okay if you have those switch. Alright guys, so this concludes my first video for this section 8.7. If you guys like my videos, you guys can click on the like button, and you can also subscribe to my channel, and make sure you guys practice, and I'll see you guys later.